I have no desire to take unto myself any credit for this work having so rapidly run through its first edition. But it is a source of no more But it is a source of no small gratification to find that the discipline, endurance, and gallantry evinced by British officers and seamen under no ordinary trial, which I have endeavored to chronicle for the honor of my profession, are so warmly appreciated by our countrymen. I am indebted to my kind friend, Mr. Barrow, FRS, of the Admiralty, and to the liberality of Messrs. Graves and Co., for permission to copy the admirable portrait of Captain Sir Robert McClure, originally painted by Mr. Stephen Pierce, an engraving of which was published by them. My gallant friend, Captain F.L. McClintock, has placed me under deep obligations for the kind manner in which his valuable observations upon the fauna of the Arctic archipelago
archipelago.
My gallant friend, Captain F.L. McClintock, has placed me under deep obligations for the kind manner in which his valuable observations upon the fauna of the Arctic archipelago were made available. They are embodied with my own in an entirely new chapter. To Sir Roderick Murchison, my thanks are also due on behalf of the investigators, as well as for myself, for his valuable papers of general remarks upon the geological specimens and fossils brought home by Captain Sir Robert McClure. My opinions upon the abandonment of our ships in the Arctic regions have been mistaken for those of Captain Robert McClure. I have therefore erased them from this work, the more willingly as it has been shown to me that the record of the greatest achievement of our day can be rendered perfect without connecting it in any way with the saddest tale in naval history. London, January 1st, 1857. The annals of Arctic history afford so many noble illustrations. The annals of Arctic history afford so many noble illustrations of the spirit of enterprise and hardihood of our sailors, that in this point of view alone they can, it is to be hoped, never fail to interest the British people. It is easy to attempt to cast ridicule on any generous impulse of a nation or an individual by speaking of it as quixotic, foolhardy, and so forth. But if it be a weakness in English seamen that for 3 centuries they have sought to win honor and renown in regions where the ordinary hardships of those whose business is upon the great waters are multiplied 100-fold, it will assuredly be no joyous day for England when her sailors shall be free from the charge of any such chivalrous extravagance. Sir John Franklin and his 138 gallant followers went forth to achieve the Northwest Passage. They discovered it and perished victims to their seal. And then came one worthy to follow in their footsteps, Captain Sir Robert Le Mesurier McClure. He came indeed too late to save Franklin, but at least he completed the search for him on one given line by passing from ocean to ocean, and he secured to the Royal Navy and to Great Britain the imperishable renown of having successfully accomplished the enterprise so long attempted in vain. The editor feels that in the following narrative he has scarcely done justice to the many noble qualities of every individual forming the gallant company of the investigator, but he has at any rate endeavored to place on record some feeble acknowledgement of their heroic courage and self-devotion. The delay in the production of this work has arisen from the editor having been obliged to leave England upon active service, and the many calls upon his time and attention have rendered perhaps still more imperfect the naturally unpolished style of a sailor's narrative. But in the accuracy of this narrative, the editor challenges the closest investigation for his ambition, in that the work may remain as the history of a great event in naval chronicles, and perhaps awaken in the breasts of future Franklins, Parrys, or McClures that love for perilous adventure, which must ever form a most valuable trait in the character of a maritime people. The editor has not indulged in wholesale praise, for it was no part of his task to write up every man as a hero who sailed into the Arctic seas and out again. Indiscriminate commendation is loathsome to all right-minded men. And it would be poor reward indeed to those whose tale of suffering and gallantry is recounted in the following pages to compare their successes with the failures as rife in the Arctic seas as elsewhere. For information on various points, and for assistance in the pleasing but anxious task of collating this narrative with various authorities, the editor has been indebted to Captain, now Sir Robert McClure, Commander Gurney Cresswell, whose sketches enlivened the letterpress, John Barrow, Esquire, F.R.S., Captain Washington, hydrographer to the Admiralty, John Hay, Esquire of the Admiralty, and other kind friends to whom he tenders his hearty thanks. HMS Medusa, Sea of Azov, Sea of Azov, April 1856. From the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty to Captain Collinson, C.B. of Her Majesty's ship, quote, Enterprise, unquote, dated 15 January 1850, by the Commissioners for executing the office of Lord High Admiral of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. 1. Whereas the efforts that have been made during the last 2 years to relieve the Erebus and Terror have failed, and all access to the Parry Islands has been prevented by the accumulation of ice in the upper part of Barrow Straits, and whereas it is possible that the same severity of weather may not prevail at the same time in both the eastern and western entrances of the Arctic Sea, we have now determined in a matter of such moment to send an expedition into the Polar Sea from the westward, and having a full confidence in your zeal and skill, we have thought proper to appoint you the command of Her Majesty's ship Enterprise, and also to place under your orders Her Majesty's ship Investigator, both of which vessels have been duly fortified against collision with the ice, equipped for the polar climate by warm air apparatus, and furnished with provisions for 3 years, as well as a large supply of extra stores. You are now required and directed, so soon as they are, in all respects, ready for sea, to proceed to make the best of your way to Cape Virgins, in order to arrive at Bering Straits in July. 2. At Cape Virgins, the Commander-in-Chief in the Pacific has been desired to have a steam vessel waiting for you, and by her you will be towed through the Straits of Magellan and the Wellington Channel and on to Valparaiso. 3. At that port you will use the utmost despatch in watering and refreshing your crews, and in fully replenishing your bread and other provisions and stores, and having so done, you will again use your best exertions to press forward to the Sandwich Islands. 4. There is only a bare possibility of your reaching these islands in time to meet Her Majesty's ship Herald under the command of Captain Henry Kellett. But if that should be the case, you will receive from him not only every assistance, but much useful information touching your passage to the strait and your further proceedings to the northward. It is still more improbable that Her Majesty's ship, Plover, should be there. But wherever you may fall in with her, you are hereby directed to take her and Commander Moore under your orders. Five. At the Sandwich Islands, you will find additional orders from us to your guidance, which we propose to forward from hence by the Panama mail of next March. But if none should arrive, or if they do not in any way modify these directions, you will enforce the greatest diligence in re-victualling your 2 vessels, in procuring if possible the necessary Esquimaux interpreters, and in making all requisite preparations for at once proceeding to Bering Straits, in order to reach the ice before the 1st of August. 6. An examination of the several orders issued to Captain Kellett will show that it is uncertain where he may be fallen in with. You may probably find the Herald and the Plover together. 7. We consider it essential that after entering the ice there should be a depot or point of succor for any party to fall back upon. For this purpose, the Plover is to be secured in the most favorable quarter as far in advance as can be found, such as Wainwright's Inlet or the creek at Hope Point. But if they be unsafe and none has been discovered nearer to Barrow's Point, then at Chamiso Island or any part of Kotzebue Sound, which may afford the necessary shelter. 8. Considering, however, the nature of the service in which the Plover will already have been employed, and that a portion of her crew may be unfit to contend with the rigors of a further stay in those latitudes, you will call for volunteers from that ship and from the Herald, if in company sufficient to form a crew for the Plover, taking care that the men to be selected are men of good character, and that they do not exceed in number what is actually required for the care of the ship, and for defense and security against any treacherous attack on the part of the natives of Norton Sound. 9. The petty officers' ratings that may be vacated by men invalidated are to be filled up by men volunteering to remain. Such volunteers are to be subjected to a strict and careful survey by the medical officers of the several ships, and those only are to be retained who would seem to be in all respects fit to encounter this extended service, and the remainder necessary to complete the crew is to be made up from the Enterprise and Investigator. 10. Such crew having been formed to continue under the command of Commander Moore and with the officers now in the Plover, or with those who may volunteer for the service. The Plover, if the Herald should be in company, is to be filled up by Captain Kellett with all the provisions, fuel, and stores that can possibly be spared by Captain Kellett, who will bear in mind not only what may be required for the use of the Plover's crew until the autumn of 1853, and the contingency of parties arriving on board from Sir John Franklin's expedition, but also the possibility of any party from the Enterprise or Investigator having to fall back upon the Plover. 11. In providing for this necessary equipment for the Plover, attention will be paid to the numbers left in the Herald and the supplies necessary to carry that vessel to Wahoo. And having received from Captain Kellett any biters or light boats that he may be able to spare and which may be likely to form a useful addition to your own boats or those of the Investigator. When searching parties may be detached from the ships in the spring, the Herald will return to the Sandwich Islands, there to fill up provisions, and from thence proceed to Hong Kong on her way to England in pursuance of our orders of the 14th December last. 12. On detaching the Plover to take up her winter quarters, you will direct Commander Moore to remain there until you join him, or failing your return to him, until the end of the summer of 1853. When, but not until it is absolutely necessary for securing the plover's passage through the Aleutian group of islands, he is to quit Bering's Straits and make the best of his way to Valparaiso, touching at the Sandwich Islands for refreshment, where he will receive further instructions relative to his return to England from the Commander-in-Chief. 13. If the Herald and the Plover should be fallen in with the northward and eastward of Bering's Straits or in the Polar Sea, Captain Kellett, on detaching himself from your company, should consort with the Plover as far as her winter quarters, and if time and circumstances admitted of it, he should assist in securing her there. 14. In the event of your having to winter your ships on the continent of Esquimaux or Eskimo shores, you will probably meet with some of the wandering tribes or with Indians. With these, you will cultivate a friendly feeling by making them presents of those articles to which they are apt to attach a value. But you will take care not to suffer yourself to be surprised by them, but use every precaution and be constantly on your guard against any treacherous attack. You will also, by offering rewards to be paid in such manner as you may be able to arrange, endeavor to prevail on them to carry to any of the settlements of the Hudson's Bay Company an account of your situation and proceedings, with an urgent request that it may be forwarded to England with the utmost possible despatch. "15. In whatever place you may have to establish your winter quarters, you will devote every resource in your power to the preservation of the health, the comfort, and the cheerfulness of the people committed to your care. 16. We leave it to your judgment and discretion as to the course to be pursued after passing Point Barrow and on entering the ice, and you will be materially assisted in this respect by what you will learn from Captain Kellett if he should be fallen in with at the Sandwich Islands, as well as from the observations of Sir E. Parry and Captain Beechey, contained in the memoranda of which we sent you copies. 17. We have decided that you shall be furnished not only with a copy of the orders under which Commander Moore is now acting, but also with copies of all the orders which from time to time have been given to Captain Kellett, as well as with those under which an attempt was made to relieve the Erebus and Terror by Captain Sir James Ross on the eastern side through Baffin's Bay. You will further be supplied with all the printed voyages or travels in those northern regions, and with the memoranda and instructions drawn up by Sir John Richardson as to the manners and habits of the Esquimaux, and the best mode of dealing with that people, a copy of which is also sent, will afford a valuable addition to the information now supplied to you. 18. We deem it right to caution you against suffering the two vessels placed under your orders to separate, except in the event of accident or unavoidable necessity, and we desire that you will keep up the most unreserved communication with the commander of the Investigator, placing in him every proper confidence and acquainting him with the general tenor of your orders and with your views and intentions from time to time, so that the service may have the full benefit of your united efforts in the prosecution of such a service, and that in the event of any unavoidable separation or of any accident to yourself, Commander McClure may have the advantage of knowing, up to the latest period, all your ideas and designs relative to the satisfactory completion of this undertaking. 19. We also recommend that as frequent an exchange may take place as conveniently may be of the observations made in the two ships, that any information obtained by the one be as quickly as possible communicated for the advantage and guidance of the other. 20. In case of any irreparable accident happening to the Enterprise, you are hereby authorized to take command of the Investigator and make such arrangements for the officers and crews as may be most consonant to the rules of the service and most conducive to the objects of the expedition. "21. In the event of Great Britain being involved in hostilities with any foreign power, In the event of Great Britain being involved in hostilities with any foreign power during your absence, you are to abstain from the smallest act of aggression towards any vessel belonging to such nation. It being the practice of all civilized countries to consider vessels engaged in service of this kind as exempt from the rules and operations of war. 22. In carrying out the foregoing orders, you will avail yourself of every practicable occasion of acquainting our secretary with every step of your progress, as well as with your future intentions, and occasionally during your voyage you will throw overboard one of the tin cylinders with which you have been supplied, headed up in any cask or barrel that you could manufacture or spare, containing an account of the date, position, etc., on your reaching England. You will call on every person in both vessels to deliver up their logs, journals, charts, and drawings, but which they may be informed shall be returned to them in due time. 23. With respect to your search proving fruitless, and your finally quitting the polar seas, as well as your securing your winter quarters towards the close of any one season, we cannot too strongly impress upon you the necessity of the utmost precaution and care being exercised in withdrawing in time, so as in no case to hazard the safety of the ship and the lives of those entrusted to your care by your being shut up in a position which might render a failure of provisions possible. We feel it unnecessary to give you more detailed instructions, which might possibly embarrass you in a service of this description. We have therefore only to repeat our perfect reliance on your judgment and resolution, both in doing all that is possible to relieve the missing ships, and in withdrawing in time, when you come to the painful conclusion that your efforts are unavailing. 24. You will bear in mind that the object of the expedition is to obtain intelligence and to render assistance to Sir John Franklin and his companions, and not for the purposes of geographical or scientific research. And we conclude these orders with an earnest hope that Providence may crown your efforts with success, and that they may be the means of dispelling the gloom and uncertainty which now prevail respecting the missing expedition. Given under our hands this 15th day of January, 1850, signed F.T. Baring, J. W. D. Dundas, by command of their lordships, signed J. Parker, Richard Collinson, Esquire, C.B., Captain of the HMS Enterprise at Devonport. The successful realization of the project so long cherished in Great Britain of the discovery of a way through the Arctic Ocean to the Indies, the final solution of a problem sought through many an arduous struggle during the course of 300 years, is what is our present duty to chronicle, and we may be permitted in the first place briefly to remind the reader of the reasons that made such a voyage desirable. On looking at the surface of the globe, it will be seen at a glance that the Asiatic peninsulas of Hindostan, China, and Japan, the offers of the Old World, are placed, geographically speaking, with respect to Western Europe, in the most distant and inaccessible position. Turn to an ancient atlas and think of the antress, vast and deserts idle that lay between India and Europe, and we can better appreciate the forays of the great Macedonian, the difficulties he encountered, and the genius which, in mastering them, raised him to the rank of a demigod among his countrymen. Yet Alexander left no footprints east of the Indus. The legions of imperial Rome failed to carry their conquering eagles to a region which they must have been fully aware contributed largely to the enormous wealth of Jerusalem, Judea, and Egypt. Even Roman ambition was checked by the difficulties of the route. The Mahometan, more fortunate in his central position, served for ages to act as the medium of transit for the spices and products of the East to Western Europe, whither the Crusader carried back a knowledge of and taste for luxuries previously unknown. A knowledge which created new wants and excited the mercantile and nautical skills of nations dwelling upon the shores of the Mediterranean. Venice and Genoa rose to greatness upon their lucrative trade with the East, and the fact soon came home to the common sense of their neighbors, and awakened the desire to supplant them or share in their profits. share in their profits. In the middle of the 13th century, Marco Polo brought back to Western Europe such glowing accounts of the East as verified all the traditionary tales of Cipango and Cathay. Enterprise and cupidity were aroused. The Portuguese slowly but successfully proceeded along that African the Portuguese slowly but successfully proceeded along that African shore, which as they knew touched the east upon the Mediterranean Sea, and which they might therefore infer would eventually lead them to the prize, if they followed it in an opposite direction. Columbus, with more genius, ascribed to the Indies a vast extent of eastern longitude, and then deducted from certain traditionary accounts of a land lying west of Iceland, whither he had traded, that by sailing in that direction from the Isle of Fayal, he would secure to the prince that should employ him possession of the Indies. Columbus sailed eventually under Spanish auspices and discovered a land which he naturally imagined was the long-wished-for eastern continent. England, not less than Spain and Portugal, was excited to maritime adventure by the wonderful discovery of the new continent, then supposed to be the eastern seaboard of the long-sought Indies. These Indies, in the meantime, were actually reached by the Portuguese under Vasco da Gama by way of that Cape of Torments, flatteringly named by John II, Cabo da Boa Esperança. Cabo da Boa Esperança. Before a century had passed, however, both Spaniards and Englishmen found that a wide ocean lay between their western discovery and Cathay, and that although the Spaniard could reach it by rounding the continent of America at the Straits of Magellan, yet he forbade all others the right to risk the adventure, and treated as pirates all of our countrymen who dared approach his conquests. The Portuguese, in like manner, monopolized the route round the African continent, and both added to the danger that awaited the English navigator in his efforts to share the booty of the East. John Cabot, who in the service of Henry VII had secured for Britain a title to American discovery, left a son, Sebastian, whom Edward VI wisely patronized. With this man seems first to have originated the idea of reaching the coveted land by taking a north-about route, and thus avoiding the dangers of the great sea voyage by either cape. Our seamen, accustomed to the hardships and cold of northern latitudes, feared the frigid as little or less than the torrid zone, and only 40 years after Nunes de Balboa, Vasco Nunes de Balboa discovered and took possession of the Pacific Ocean. In 1513, Vasco Nunes de Balboa discovered and took possession of the Pacific Ocean! The Pacific Ocean! In 1513. Our seamen, accustomed to the hardships and cold of northern latitudes, fear the frigid and little or less than the torrid zone, and only 40 years after Nunes de Balboa waded into the sea at Panama and, striking it with his sword, claimed the broad Pacific as the property of Spain. The first English Arctic expedition sailed to achieve a northeast passage to Cathay. 3 ships left Greenwich under Sir Hugh Willoughby on May 10th, 1553. And were rewarded by discovering Nova Zembla and the White Sea. But the subsequent melancholy fate of the admiral and his crew, who were frozen or starved to death in Lapland, checked the national enthusiasm. And although 2 more attempts were made in the same direction, they were equally unsuccessful. The Dutch, like ourselves, anxious to share, share, so anxious to share in the wealth of the Indies, so jealously watched by Spaniards and Portuguese, tried to reach them by a northeast route. Barents likewise perished in gallant and unavailing attempts to carry out his country's wishes, and after him England made 2 slight efforts in the same direction under Hudson and Cherry, and then turned her attention in the opposite one. Prior to the time of Barents's northeastern expedition, the first northwest voyage had already been attempted from Great Britain. Martin Frobisher, a seaman of Queen Elizabeth's time, was the first to call attention to the possibility of reaching the east, Cipango, and Cathay by passing north of America. For 15 years, he patiently urged his ideas upon the consideration of his countrymen, and at last, in 1576, in the reign of Elizabeth, he sailed to commence that work which the seamen of England only completed in 1854, or 274 years afterwards, in the reign of It is not our purpose to follow Frobisher, Davis, Hudson, and Baffin through their adventures and discoveries. Our charts of the present day, on which the localities they discovered bear their respective names, sufficiently attest the amount of the additions they made to our geographical knowledge. But when the last named great navigator, Baffin, returned in 1616 from the most successful of his voyages, the Northwest Passage was, as Martin Frobisher said, a thing yet undone, whereby a notable mind might be made famous and fortunate. Yes, elapsed. Men's minds took another turn. Times changed. The maritime supremacy of Britain gradually developed itself. If Spain could boast of her Magellan, England had her Drake. The tide of fortune now turned slowly in favor of our hardy race of seamen. Along the seaboard of Spanish America, whether in the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans, the English seamen slowly but steadily established their preeminence, and within a brief period from the date of the first Indian cargo, on the 15th of September, 1592, the first cargo of Indian produce was exposed in Leadenhall. It was captured by George Clifford, Earl of Cumberland, in the Portuguese carrack Madre de Dios of the Azores. Being exposed in Leadenhall And within a brief period from the date of the first Indian cargo being exposed in Leadenhall Market, which cargo was a prize, a footing was obtained in India. And the foundation of our Eastern Empire firmly established. From 1632, when Captains Fox and James discovered the localities by the names of which their memories have there been preserved, a century elapsed before the attempt to discover a north-west passage to India. From 1632, when Captains Fox and James discovered the localities by the names of which their memories have there been preserved, a century elapsed before the attempt to discover a northwest passage to India was resumed. Even then, although a reward of £20,000 was offered, the attempts of Scroggs, Dobbs, and Middleton in 1741 yielded no better fruit than many of our modern ones. They produced a vast deal of writing, exaggerated accounts of difficulties, and no results of any value. Captain Cook's success in the South Seas, and indeed wherever he went, led the nation to hope that he might be the man fated to secure his country the honor of a discovery which was so much desired for commercial as well as geographical purposes. He failed, however, in entering the ice, as well as and well was it for himself and his crew that he did so. The fate of Sir Hugh Willoughby would assuredly have befallen them, unprepared as his ships were for such a voyage and the rigors of such a climate.